What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Clean Libertarian Podcast. And thank you guys for hanging in there, sticking with me. I am so sorry I didn't have any content out to you guys last week. I really don't have a good reason either. That's the thing. You know, I did have a couple ideas. Stuff didn't pan out. But hey, man, it is what it is. You know, life at the speed of life, so they say. And so, yeah, just one of them weeks you didn't get any content. So to make up for it, though, you have a great interview this week. This week I have the great Dan Behrman on to talk about not only kind of what he's doing with his campaign, but how he's organized it, his ideas on how best to approach getting drug policy changed and changing hearts and minds across the country. And the man is very well versed. You know, a lot of people just kind of spitball. Dan is one of those people who has honestly sat down and he's coming up with some new and inventive ways to approach this. And yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. So with that, I'm going to bring on Dan Behrman. Guys, I am here with my friend Daniel Behrman, the man, the myth, the legend. Brother, I dropped the ball. Like I told you, man, I should have had you on way earlier in the run of the podcast than now, but better late than never, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right on, man. Well, how are you doing, brother?
Good, man. Anytime I hear better late than never, I always think of that scene with Cheech in Ghostbusters when the Titanic just showed up. Better late than never. Yeah, man, everything's going great. I'm working on like a million different projects. But we're trying new things. We're getting exciting new results, and yeah, I mean, there's no short explanation. I just talked your ear off for like 20 minutes before we started the show.
It's all good, man. I love
just
it.
To give you the recap, like, yeah. So let's dive in.
You're good. Now, I like hearing about this because, like, here's the thing: is that it's really easy to rest, you know, and kind of get to a place of complacency. And so, when I look at people like you that are actually like going out and doing stuff, it amps me up. So I don't mind hearing this stuff at all. And I know my audience doesn't either.
Yeah. No, that is really true. It's and like, I know, like I've kind of been there myself. Like you get really frustrated that you're putting in all this work and like, you're not seeing much change in the world because there's so many people that are still, you know, following the government's bullshit. This is the Clean Libertarian Show. Do I have to keep it clean?
That's the one thing. So despite the name, like Jesus, I cussed way too much.
All
every single Clean Libertarian episode is marked as explicit. You're good to go.
Right. Just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, so like you see, it's frustrating, right? The amount of progress that we get is just like it's so slow, and at some point, it's just kind of like, you know, especially, you know, you work to improve yourself, you get to a point where it's like, hey, things are comfortable. Like I've avoided paying a lot of taxes. I've been able to acquire, you know, quite a bit of freedom for myself. Like, why even bother trying to help all these other people out who don't even care about actual freedom if, you know, they don't even want to listen, they don't care about it. And like, it is kind of like an internal struggle. Like I could just retire and like, I could live the life I always wanted to live before I ever got involved in politics. And like, I'm kind of at that point, and it's like, okay, but that's just, I just can't do that. I can't bring myself to do that because like it's like knowing that these things still exist in the world. Maybe it's, you know, it's OCD where it's just like, you know, I know it's not really bothering me that thing on the wall isn't perfectly level, but I have to make it perfectly level. You know, maybe it's that kind of thing, but yeah, I can't bring myself to like settle down. I have to keep fighting this. It's just, I don't know. It's in my DNA, I guess.
Well, I'm appreciative for it, man. You know, we need, and you know, here's the thing. I guess we all kind of go through seasons too. You know, like I'm sure you'll go through a season of just like, man, fuck this. And you know, look back around to it. And that's kind of the thing, man. Like if you're here and you're putting in the work and you're putting in the effort, you're doing whatever you can for liberty, you did so because you're called to do so. You did so because you have that thing inside of you that other people just are able to, either they don't have it at all or they're able to shut that thing off. But for those of us who can't, like we find ourselves right back here, no matter how far we try to run away from it, you know, we're right back in the fight. And it's not a bad thing. You know, it's not.
Yeah, no, I mean, you always need a rest, and it's funny because like as much as I love criticizing all politicians, especially the ones who are elected, like I see people, like, oh, the president's on the golf course again, and it's like what you expect him to like never sleep and just sit in his office 24/7 and like work bombing people. It's like it's probably better that he's on the golf course, actually, if we think about
Without
it.
a doubt.
But it's like, yeah, I mean, as much as I love to criticize those guys, it's like let's criticize them for things that they should actually be criticized for. Let's it's funny, like the same people who will sit there saying like, oh, my employer needs to give me more vacation time and maternity leave and all this other stuff. You're basically the employer of all these representatives, and now you're saying, no, that's my employee, he better work around the clock. Right. And it's like, well, that's interesting. Why don't you have any kind of like sorry, I'm sometimes when it gets late and I've been thinking all day, my vocabulary starts to disappear.
It's all good. All good, man.
How come your morals and ethics are not the same when applied to every situation? How come you're cherry picking here? Yeah, it's I don't know, but it's something interesting to observe, and nobody's perfect. Like, even I realize a lot of the things that I say, sometimes I come back and revisit them, and I'm like, okay, yeah, or somebody will tweet something and someone replies, well, yeah, but what about this? And I'm like, okay, yeah, fair point. And we kind of have to do that, because otherwise we turn into these like idiots who think like, oh, everything I know is right, and like nothing ever gets corrected. You never learn, you never grow. And then you start like the things that you thought that were really stupid that you continue to think never get corrected, and then they just kind of grow like cancer, and you say the dumbest things like, if too many people move to this island, it'll tip over.
Right.
Yeah. I don't remember. There was a congressman or someone who said that.
I remember that, man. I can't remember which one, but I remember the clip.
And wasn't he a brain surgeon too, or something? I don't know.
Something insane. I mean, something like the guy should have clearly known better. Like, I mean, even just a second grade comprehension of the world around you.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. See, that's one situation where I would say don't do drugs.
One of the few, huh?
Yeah.
Right on. Well, I really wanted to bring you on absolutely to talk about kind of your campaign, what you got going on there, some of the efforts that you've done, not necessarily campaign wise, but just being a generally good person, But I really wanted to start out getting your take on drug policy, ending this war on drugs, and how you think the best approach is going forward. And so we could start from there and kind of segue into kind of what you got going on, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So let me start here, because we were talking about the campaign a little bit. What I'm trying to do, because I know like there hasn't really been a really, really, really strong, I mean, I know I'm going to get shot for saying this. There hasn't been a really, really, really strong gubernatorial libertarian campaign for a statewide office, right, for a governor. And one of the reasons I think that is because the party is so small. And I know there have been really strong people that we've had that we've nominated. But like, we haven't seen like someone coming close to winning one of those races. And the reason for that, I think, is because we're in this mentality of, if we get someone on the ballot and we just talk to enough people, then somehow, everybody hates the two-party system. They'll just come around and vote for us. But right. I think the reality of that is just non-existent. And so learning how the Democrats and the Republicans work, and looking more into like what they've actually done and what's their infrastructure. Because some new Democrat just comes along out of nowhere and he just shows up and he's on the Democrat ballot, he gets elected. Why is that? And we know a lot of it is because people are like, oh, I'm just going to vote straight ticket Democrat, right? But there's a lot of other stuff going on. And so when what the Libertarian Party does is they run candidates. They get some people to get familiar with them. Maybe a few thousand people know the name, because, of course, we don't have millions of dollars to throw at it. We get a few thousand people to really know the name. then in the next election cycle, we have a new candidate, and then we're starting from scratch. We're starting from zero, and by the end of that, we'll have a few thousand people. But what the Democrats and Republicans do is they have these political organizations like Fight for 15. And so any new candidate that comes around who has never run for anything, they just go to Fight for 15 and say, hey, I'm a Democrat. Give me your voting guide and give me your questionnaire. Let me fill it out. Go tell all your people to vote for me. And Fight for 15 has it's a very specific, a very narrow single issue organization that focuses on one thing. And because it focuses on one thing, they have a lot of really active donors, really active volunteers, and really active voters who are, oh yeah, we need a $15 minimum wage. We need it. Who do we have to vote for to make it happen? Then they get the voter guide and they go out and they vote for all these people. And so in doing so, what they're creating kind of like a torch that can be passed along from election cycle to election cycle. And the libertarians don't really have that. Now, what's interesting too, is if you look at like the Democrats or Republicans, there's not a whole lot of people out there saying, hey, come to the Democrat convention. It's going to be really fun. And you should sign up as a lifetime member and you should join, and come to our monthly meetings. That doesn't really happen, but that's the libertarian strategy, and it doesn't really work because what happens is you find somebody who's interested in cannabis legalization, and then you're like, oh yeah, well, we're all about that at the Libertarian Party, and then you bring them to a meeting, and then they're like, what's all this economic stuff? I don't like math. I don't want to hear any of this stuff. I just want to legalize weed. How do we make that happen? And it's too much information. It's too many subjects they don't really care about. They might even be against guns, and so you bring that up and you've totally lost their support, and then they're gone. Whereas if you have a single issue organization and you bring them in and say, yeah, all we're here to do is legalize cannabis, they're going to be showing up to every single meeting because that's all they care about. They're going to be showing up to every single rally. They're going to be donating money. They're going to be donating time. They'll go door to door knocking on doors for you. And so what I really think we need to do is kind of create these single issue organizations around libertarian, or not around libertarian issues, just around issues, and create libertarian solutions and show them to people and get them interested. So how I'm kind of we're doing a launch with this for this campaign, for this gubernatorial campaign, and we've got 3 organizations. So one of them is called Legalize Happiness, and that's the drug one, obviously, which is a totally different spin. Because if you look at NORML, you look at Texans for Reform Marijuana Policy, there's a million legalized cannabis organizations out there. Some of them are citywide, statewide, national. But if you look at all of them, they've got 2 main arguments. One of them is it's got amazing medicinal properties, and so we need to legalize it as medicine, and it can raise so much money for the state in the form of taxes, so we need to legalize it. But neither of those are libertarian policies, right? Those are just stop throwing people in prison.
Right.
And so what I want to do is I want to create, or what I did create, is an organization called Legalize Happiness, where basically we're saying it doesn't matter if it has medicinal value. If the only purpose cannabis has is getting high, that is your right. That is your pursuit of happiness, which is in the Declaration of Independence. It is declared as a human right. It is constitutionally protected by the 9th Amendment. And this is our right to pursue happiness as long as we're not harming anybody else. It doesn't matter if there's any medicinal value. That's just icing on the cake. As far as taxes, it's a human right, and rights cannot be taxed. You can't tax. Most food is not supposed to be taxed. If you go to the grocery store, you're not paying sales tax on it because it's food. It's recognized as a necessity. If restaurants usually they charge a tax because someone's preparing it for you, and that's a luxury. But
Right.
for the most part, your drinking water, your food, all this stuff isn't supposed to be taxed. It would be nice if your rent and your land weren't taxed, but that's another story, because those are necessities for living. But the idea in general, and the Supreme Court has ruled, rights cannot be taxed. So basically, we're going back to legalize cannabis, but now we're actually teaching libertarian philosophy as part of the reason why. We're not using excuses. We're using actual, this is morally what is right and the way that we should operate in this world, and this is how we relate it to that single issue. So we have another one called free healthcare, and the idea for this is because the left is usually the ones who are usually crying out for Medicare for all or some sort of universal healthcare, something like that, right? So we created this thing called free healthcare, and it's intended to get their attention. It's not intended to mislead them. It is we say free as in freedom, right?
Right.
If we say healthcare is a human right. If you're a doctor and I'm a patient, I have a right to go to you and ask you for help. Now you have a right to ask me for money, of course, but we have this mutual right to work with each other. And if it's a right, it can't be taxed, and the government can't get in between us and say, wait a minute, he's not, we know you think he's going to treat you with the way that you want to be treated, but he can only treat you the way we want to treat you. That's not treating it like a right. That's treating it like a government luxury that, we can only have it a certain way. So again, we're trying to bring more libertarian philosophy into it, and this is where we talk about the smuggling the insulin from Mexico to the U.S. because why is insulin only $12 in Mexico and Canada when it's $100 in the United States? The corporations, it's the same brand. The corporations are just as greedy in Mexico and Canada as they are in the United States. Why is it more in the United States? And it's because of the FDA and the import laws and all this other stuff. So again, the government has created policies that are hurting us. And if you get those policies out of the way, the cost of our healthcare will be reduced so much, we'll actually be able to afford it without needing like these ridiculous insurance plans. So that's, and I know a lot of people will still ask for more when it comes to healthcare. But we can say, look, this is the first starting ground. Let's get the cost down. And the reality is when you compare this to things like Medicare for all, the reality with Medicare for all is we're all going to be taxed. So we're all going to be paying for it. And at the end of the day, sure, we'll get what we want. Even let's forget about the fact that there might be really long lines for a while, but the corporations that are making all this money off of us are going to be able to charge whatever they want because the government is obligated now to pay for it. And so you're solving one problem where we get our health care, but you're making the other problem worse, which is all the billionaires getting rich off of our health or lack thereof. Whereas with the free healthcare system, what we're actually doing by fixing these regulations that actually cause the prices to fall, we're actually taking profit away from these mega corporations, and we're giving more freedom and choice back to us and more control of our own health, and more options and more availability. And if we have access to everything we need, even if we have to pay cash for it, it's such a small fraction compared to what it costs now that like no one's going to be even complaining about the price of it. So again, it does kind of border on economics and that sort of thing, but we focus mostly on the healthcare. Like we do want people to have access to healthcare. We do want them to be able to afford medication, afford doctor's visits. There are doctors here in the United States who aren't allowed to practice because the government says so. They're doctors from other countries who've been practicing. They might be the top of their field and they're not allowed to practice here. That's limiting resources, which means longer wait times and higher prices. And the government is intentionally doing this to us to protect those higher prices so the doctors who are certified here can keep their prices high. That's all it is. And we want to educate people about that and get them to come around to basically the libertarian solution for that. And then the third organization is, and we've got like maybe a dozen of these things lined up, but we're starting with 3 because I'm already spread pretty thin with this. But the third one is called Rent Free America. And again, this goes towards the left, who are complaining about, the rent is too high. The cost of living is too high. We shouldn't have to be, working like slaves around the clock, 40 hours a week, 60, 80 hours a week. And this basically goes to them with a compassionate voice and says, yeah, you're absolutely right. This whole system is messed up. We have some solutions to fix it. And so we offer solutions like legislation that would get a landlord to go to the state and say, hey, I don't want to pay property tax. And the state would say, okay, we'll get rid of your property tax, but you have to pass that savings down to your renter. So what's great about this is it makes the left and the right both happy. The left is happy because their rents get lowered, and the right is happy because their property tax gets lowered. It's a win-win. And then there's other things like your property tax should be tax deductible. All of your mortgage payments should be tax deductible. Your rent should be tax deductible. All of this stuff should be tax deductible, which reduces our cost of living, which makes it easier for us to save money so we can pay off our debts, so we can buy homes of our own. And the reason we call it Rent-Free America is not because we want to cancel rent or anything like that, although we do want those people who are in that group currently to come around and support what we're doing. But we do want to get people to stop paying rent and start becoming owners. And one of the things I think I mentioned a little bit before the show is how the housing market is down in Mexico. Hardly anybody borrows money from a bank to get a mortgage to buy a house, because they don't have an FHA, which means your down payment is really high. And if you're going to do that, it's like, I might as well just buy the whole house. Why get a bank involved? They're just going to rip me off with high interest rates. So they skip that and they just buy their houses. And in the US, like, we think, oh, but that's so expensive. Nobody can afford to pay cash for a house. But the reason you can't is because the FHA has inflated the market. So we want to bring the housing prices down. And I know some people are like, oh my God, my property value, I want it to stay up. Well, the reality is that's kind of already inflated. So we have other problems to fix there. But the good news with that is that as we shift renters into buyers, we're going to have more stability in the housing market completely. We're not going to have people who are homeless because they couldn't pay their property tax and they got dragged out of their house. There's commercial apartment buildings that have like 1,000 units in it. Those places, when the renting market starts declining, they might convert those into condos and sell them off to their customers. We might see a lot more rent to own type agreements going on, so that as you're paying your rent, you can actually you're actually building equity in the place. There's so many different options we can look at that the common renter is just not aware of, and because they're not aware of it, they're not demanding it when they go to rent a place, and because they're not demanding it, the renters aren't offering it. So this is one of those things where if we all start demanding something, we can actually cause real change without even requiring legislation. So there's a little bit of financial education in there, teaching people to live within their means, pay off their credit cards, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's really it is very libertarian. We don't have any there's no new taxes or no new government programs to create assistance. It's really just like, let's help each other out and let's figure out how to work things back so that we can put this puzzle back together so that we can all live our lives freely, own our homes, and not worry about getting kicked off our land just because we didn't pay some taxes.
Man, I dig that quite a bit. So have you how have you been doing this? So like, I know you said there's organizations, like I would imagine like you have one person in charge of each, or do you have somebody coordinating all three, or are you just kind of like shouldering all this on your own?
Yeah, we have. So we're definitely sharing some resources between them, especially for now. As they get bigger, maybe that'll happen where we have dedicated people for each project. But I think the fact that we're sharing resources is a big help. It's letting us get more done. And we're still this is all still really kind of in the early stages. So it's a pilot program, so we're still trying to figure out exactly how everything is going to work together. But we're right now working on building a platform for our websites where we have a voter guide where we can get all of the elected candidates and everybody who's going to be running to go fill out this voter guide, which basically has a lot of pretty intense questions that are specific to these platforms. And it asks them things like, if somebody smokes cannabis, do they deserve to be put in a jail cell? Like getting right to the point. Is smoking cannabis a human right if you're not interfering with anybody else? Because a lot of Democrats who say, yeah, we're for cannabis reform, they won't come out and say stuff like that. They like to dance around it and like, yeah, we'll move the needle a little bit. And then, of course, the Republicans are going to be very much against that. And, of course, we're going to have a lot of people on there who we're going to say, hey, we offered them this questionnaire and they refused to answer. So, this person's running. We're working on marketing campaigns for each of these. We've got volunteer organizers, and we're going to be organizing we're looking for ambassadors for each of the groups. So for this, it's more specific towards each one of these issues. But in every major city, we want to have an ambassador who cares about one of these issues specifically, because the more passionate they are about that, they're going to be a better leader. And we want to get these ambassadors to help cultivate a local community that's going to help with getting flyers out, door knocking, building mailing lists and communication lists, having events, partnering with other events, doing whatever we can to really grow these movements. So yeah, it's all kind of like there's a lot of it, and it's kind of all getting organized as we speak. So it really looks amazing. I really think that what this is going to show is that we can actually do a lot more to advance liberty with this type of organization. And I'm hoping, once we prove that, we're going to get a lot more people who, especially at the higher end, who have like a lot more resources, people who can donate a lot more money, that sort of thing, can come together and really help us get this out. And here's the best part about this for the libertarians and the anarchists out there. We created this thing called an LLO, which is a limited liability organization. And basically what it is it's like an LLC, except there's absolutely no government involved. It's not a 501c3. It's not a PAC. It's not any type of government organization. It's just a few people with a handshake agreement between each other and a little piece of paper with a contract, and a whole bunch of free speech rights. And so what this means is we're not limited on the size of donations we can take. We're not limited to be able to, like, oh, we can't endorse candidates. No, we can endorse candidates. 501c3s can't. Like all these problems that libertarians are creating, they're playing by their rules, and they're creating these organizations, and it's like, oh well, because you filed that, you're not allowed to take money from this guy, or because you did this. And it's like, but if I'm an individual and I have all my rights and I never signed any kind of government contract to create an LLC or a corporation or a PAC or any of this stuff, I can donate $1 million to put whatever billboards up I want because I have free speech, right? And so this LLO is basically just like, it's just an agreement between people who we maintain all of our free speech rights. We're not one of these organizations, and we can do whatever we want. And so that limitation, I've seen, campaigning myself, I've talked to so many, pro-cannabis organizations who are like, yeah, well, we can't endorse candidates. I've even heard some of them say, because they don't understand the rules too well, they're having an event. Oh, well, we'd love to have you speak, but because you're running for office, we don't want it to look like an endorsement, so we can't have you come speak. And it's like, what? Like, can you send out something to your mailing list about me? Oh no, we can't do that because, like I've heard like so much stuff, and this all has to do with these 501c3 rules. And granted, some of it's like misled just because the rules are complicated and not everybody gets it. But this basically does away with all that. This basically says, no, we have free speech. We're not working with any kind of government sanctioned organization. And we're retaining all of our rights, and this is how we're going to do it. So we're going to stop asking for permission, because free men don't ask for permission.
Man, I really dig this. So I don't know if you've kind of saw some of the stuff I'm doing with this sober caucus idea, but it's essentially we're in the very beginning phases of it. And it's just a group of people who either they're teetotalers or they're in recovery. And, like our main goal right now moving forward is to have a hospitality room in Reno. Like that's the big idea, a place where, there's not going to be any booze or anything like that. And just kind of a place to hang out, if that's the lifestyle you're living. I mean, at a libertarian event, you could see, the need for that, at least to a degree. So one of the things that we're running up against right now is how the fuck do we file? Like, what do we file? And just, you're pitching this idea of an LLO, and I'm like, man, this might be the thing that could help us.
So, this is how it was originally. How I kind of originally had the idea was talking about like on my podcast, always talking about corporations and like limited liability and all this stuff, right? Because libertarians are usually like, yeah, corporations are fine. It's just the illegal powers that the government gives them that we're not okay with. But when you think about it, any legitimate limited liability you have could be done contractually. So let's say you start a website and you're selling merchandise. you can have, by purchasing, you agree to the terms and conditions, and the terms and conditions say, I understand that I'm going to treat this as, its own legal entity. I'm not going to be able to sue anyone individually unless they, do something criminal. I'm not going to be able to sue an employee, a board member, a shareholder, or anything like that. I can only sue the organization as an entity. And that entity is going to be, and that lawsuit is going to be limited in liability to X amount, which is defined by the LLO. And so when we put this together, we said, let's do this kind of like how the Creative Commons does it, right? They have like this, you go to their website and you say, okay, I created this artwork. This is how I want to distribute it. And all of a sudden you have a policy that's attached to it. We wanted to do that. We wanted to make it as easy as somebody like, okay, I have a website. Let me put this little badge on the website that says, okay, you're only allowed to sue us for up to $5,000. And, if we start growing, and we have more assets and we want people to feel more comfortable, you can sue us for up to 50,000, 100,000, whatever. And then you can put like a total value on the company. So everything we have is worth $1 million, and that's our word. And if it says everything we have is worth, $5,000, and that's what the entire company is, and I can never sue beyond that, maybe I don't want to buy their product if it's something dangerous. But if it's like, so we did this actually with our cannabis company, Nug of Knowledge, where basically we're doing this, and if somebody goes there and says like, oh, I can't sue these guys for more than $5,000, but it's just cannabis, it's just hemp. So it's not like they're buying some sort of machinery that might accidentally cut their finger off if they use it wrong, or if we assembled it incorrectly or something, right? Something like that, you would be like, no, if these guys don't have like $1 million liability thing, then I don't want to deal with it. And what's interesting too is, I hear a lot of anarchists talking about like, well, yeah, and in a society without, this type of lawsuits and everything, you would have like a surety bond company who basically insures every company. Well, that's how you could get your numbers up. You want to say like, oh, this company is worth $1 million. You can sue us for up to $1 million. We have a surety bond company who basically has $1 million. So that if we ever get sued for this much, they'll cover that as a surety that our products are safe to use, and let that surety company inspect the products and let them be the ones to determine whether or not our products are safe enough for them to insure it. So this is like what we're really trying to do, is just kind of be like agoristic about it and say like, okay, let's forget all the stuff that's there and let's try to create something totally outside of it, that's free for anybody to come along and just say like, hey, that sounds like a great idea, I want to slap that on my website, or I want to that's another project that's just in its infancy. So if anyone comes along and says, hey, it would be a great idea, let's add this to it, that's something we can add to terms and conditions V1, V2, V3. Let's start growing this and advancing it, because it is something that's right now only been created by a few people, and if the more people who put their creativity into it, it could go a lot further. And then as more people start using it, we're probably going to see some actual lawsuits, because nothing like this has ever been brought into a court before. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. So it's an experiment. I know I'm taking a huge risk with it, but I think it's really awesome. A lot of people seem to think it's really awesome, and this could be the future libertarian society that everybody's talking about. But instead of asking the government, well, why don't you just make it legal for us to do it? Just recognize that it's really kind of already legal. Let's just do it. Why aren't we doing it?
Right. I dig that, man. That's punk rock right there. I dig that a lot. How did you brainstorm this? How did you come across this idea?
It really just came from those conversations about, what is like, why should corporations be able to exist? Because I like to get into those like philosophical discussions, and like it was funny. I was on a podcast where we were talking about the Federal Reserve, and we got to get rid of the Federal Reserve, and I was like, well, if you think about it, we really don't, because doesn't the libertarian or anarchist philosophy say businesses have a right to exist? It's just that they shouldn't have a monopoly on money. They could print their shit fiat as much as they want. That right. Just means, but as long as I'm not forced to use it, I don't have a problem, right?
Right.
so I think that's an interesting take, that like, again, if we want to be consistent with our ideology, we should kind of revisit that whole end the Fed. And maybe we don't need to. Well, okay, let's be honest. The Federal Reserve does a lot that's pretty criminal, so
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
reason to disband them. But at the same time, it's like having a bank that prints fiat money itself is not necessarily evil. Like, that in itself is not evil. It's all of these other things that they do. It's the legal tender laws that force us to use it. It's the fraud that goes on with their fractional reserve lending and not letting everybody know that the banks are really empty. Like, that kind of stuff is criminal, but the fiat money itself really isn't. I mean, choose your own weapon. If you think about it, Bitcoin is kind of, I don't want to say fiat, but it's like, you print it, right? If you set up mining computers, like, it takes a lot to be able to print it, but you're printing it, right? So why is it such a bad thing? Oh, it's because the rate at which they can print it is limited. And so it's, the printing itself is not necessarily bad. It's who's in charge of it, who controls it, all these other factors come into play. And so, yeah, but anyway, so I know I'm off topic of the LLO, but like, these are the kind of like philosophical conversations that I like having, that, turn into like, what can we actually do right now without having to wait for legislation to pass? Because if we wait for legislation to pass, we'll be like the skeleton on the bench in the park, just like still waiting. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And that's why, I had a guy on recently. His name is Christopher Dreisbach, and he created a program in Pennsylvania called Second Chance. And he's kind of taken this approach where, rather than like, getting policies changed and stuff like that, he's at least helping a segment of the population. And he's actually talked to the district attorney and local police departments, and he's worked out a deal to where, whenever they respond to a crime, that the obvious nexus is, drug use, shoplifting, something like that, rather than press charges, put this person through jail, send them to drug court, they call Chris up or one of his friends, and Chris shows up in person, takes that person directly to treatment, and gets them in, no charges filed whatsoever. Doesn't matter if the person had dope on them, doesn't matter, as long as there's no victim, or if there is a victim, the victim's willing to drop the charges. And that's kind of one of those ways, man. That's right. I'm more inclined to go that route, right? I mean, I'm not saying that there's no value to be found in pushing for policy change, because obviously there is, but in the immediate sense, there's people out here hurting, whether it's any one of the three types of people that your organization seeks to deal with, people in the drug, community, people in the economic, community, people actually out here hurting, like offering up tangible solutions right now, today, that can fix their life. Like, I dig that, dude. I applaud you. Like, that's good stuff.
It's also like, what's that? There was like a private security company in Detroit that when all the police were like on strike, and like there were no
threat
management or something like that. So that's kind of the same thing, right? And like generally, like, the police have a monopoly on that type of use of force everywhere. But like, when somebody, like, you've got Bitcoin, and it's like, you can sit around and say, like, yeah, like you said, like, can we just sit around and wait for this? Like, let's make some legislation before we can do this. But it's like, if someone's out there already doing it, that kind of like dissolves the fear that the general public is going to have. Like, oh, that's not going to work. There's going to be like all this crazy stuff going on. Like imagine like trying to pass legislation to make Bitcoin like on the books legal before Bitcoin was actually invented. Like, people would be like, what the hell is Bitcoin? Like, what is this? What are you guys even talking about? Get this shit out of here. I'm not going to support that. It sounds like a scam, like, or a Ponzi scheme or something. Right. But it's like, once it gets created, and I mean, let's be honest, like, part of the reason why they're not going after it too hard is because they can't, because of the way it's designed. But like, now they're, after that was created, and like, they realized everybody got really excited about it, and millions of people were onto this, and like, they kind of wanted to ban it, but at the same time, you had exchanges popping up, and now you have exchanges even in the US who are legally trading this stuff. And now you have even some of the big banks who are getting into it. So it's like if you started out where it's like sometimes it's in the black market, sometimes it's in the gray market, but it's not the legislation doesn't even know about it yet. And you create it, then it's like people kind of already know what it is by the time the legislation comes around. And so if you're trying to legalize it or create something to support it, then it's a lot easier. Like cannabis legalization, right? That's so much easier now because most of the people who are older now have like I don't know anybody who hasn't tried cannabis at least once enough to recognize this isn't the big scary drug that they were telling us it was, back in the 80s. And so, it's like everybody's tried it. So when they're talking about legalization, it's like, well, I've tried it. I know it's not that bad. Of course, we should legalize it. We shouldn't be throwing people in jail for that. And so because the law was broken or because the thing was already done, it's easier to look at the legislation and be like, yeah, that doesn't sound so scary at all. Let's legalize it.
And let me ask you this. So obviously cannabis is the safe ground. It's safe. Even mainstream politicians don't have to worry about, taking the side of, yes, let's legalize pot. When do you think that we see that discussion change to something else like cocaine, like, actual little stuff a little bit harder? Do you think that's on the horizon for us?
We're already seeing with mushrooms and LSD. I think maybe even ecstasy.
Mm-hmm.
Cocaine is a little bit further up there, but that's one of the ones I consider to be not so harmful. I would say like some of the harmful ones are like heroin and those things. But yeah, I think what we're doing is we're asking the wrong question, right? Because we always ask, should it be legal? When what we should really be asking is, if somebody takes that drug, should we pick them up and throw them in a cage? Like, that's the question we should be asking. And the answer is, unless they're taking the drug and it's like getting them to break into people's houses, the answer is no. If they're doing that, then yeah, absolutely lock them up. Meth is another one I would put up there with that.
Yeah.
But I had this, I got stopped for driving down one of those, all the people drive their drugs down this highway. So I got stopped and I was making conversation, wasting the cops' time so that everyone else could safely carry their drugs. And nice. It was interesting because there was this older, there was like the older cop who was just kind of like, down to business, trying to figure out what he could bust me for. And then like, when I wasn't really answering his questions, I was talking to the younger guy. He was a younger sheriff. And he saw like all my anti-propaganda in the trunk of my car, and he's like, "Oh, what's all that libertarian stuff?" And so we had this conversation, and he was like, "Well, what about the drug war?" And he's trying to ask the same questions in normal status. He's like, well, "What about all these bad people doing all these bad things?" And he's like, "The other day, I arrested this guy because he was breaking into someone's house so he could steal some money so he could buy some more meth." And I was like, okay, and you arrested him, right? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, and you charged him for breaking and entering, right? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, so what do drugs have to do with this? And he's like, well, that's what he was going to buy with what he was going to steal. And I'm like, would it have mattered if he was going to go buy a PlayStation or a car or feed his kids? He's still going to jail, right? Because he broke and entered. Like, so at that point, he was just kind of like, he kind of like ran out of questions to ask. But it's like, it's always the same kind of thing. Like, yeah, some people do some bad things, but some people, and like some people burn out on drugs too, right? They're like, they don't have a whole lot going for them. They do a bunch of drugs. They sit at home. They're not very productive. They end up homeless. They don't have any money, and things go to shit. That's terrible. The same thing happens to people who don't do drugs, and there are people who do drugs who that doesn't happen to. So it's not an exact correlation between the two. And people who are well off, people who do drugs and like they're not well off, but they go to their job every day. They do their job. They come home. They do their drugs. They smoke weed, or drink alcohol, or they do their drugs in the morning before they go to work, like caffeine or nicotine, right? There are people who can function on these drugs, and those people don't deserve to be locked up when they're, functioning members of society, they're not harming anybody. None of it really makes sense if you think about it. And what's interesting too, like with politics, like a lot of what I see is people are very emotionally attached to certain positions, and usually it's because of some sort of something that happened to them in their past, which, fair enough. But like, I've heard people say, oh, I used to hang out with a bunch of potheads and they were all thieves. Well, okay, but I mean, like everyone I used to hang out with when I was younger, like, yeah, there were some bad people because they were kids. And like, most people who, I don't want to say most people, but like, younger kids tend to get into more trouble than adults because like, they don't know the consequences yet. They haven't been taught, and that sort of thing. But it's like, so if they steal something, treat that like a crime. If they're like smoking some weed, it's like, who cares really? Like what, I mean,
Yeah.
I used to be a super big pothead back in the day. Like I would, every day, I was going to community college at the time because I was a late bloomer when it came to weed. Every day afterwards, I would go to my friend's house. We'd all get high, so high we'd smoke like these big bongs. We'd stare at the ceiling with the glowing stars and play the trance music and just totally trip out. Like I used to do that, and like now I'm a productive member of society. I have a regular job at like a pretty big corporation. Like as much as I hate to admit that, like, but it's like, like they would look at me and say, oh, you're definitely not a pothead based on the things I've been able to accomplish. But in reality, like, yeah, but I could have been locked up back then, and maybe that would have affected my chances of getting to where I am now, even though, that was kind of a phase that I grew out. I mean, I still smoke once in a while, but it's, not to that extent.
Right.
But it's like, we have to understand that. But like to some people, it's just like, oh no, I know potheads. I used to hang out with 2 of them. And
right.
People.
Like that's a sampling of the entirety of the population.
Right. 0.0000001%.
Right. That's funny. Well, man, Dan, you continue doing great stuff. Continue doing awesome stuff. I look forward to seeing how these organizations take shape and how much, good. I know you're going to impact a lot of lives. How can people find you and support these efforts?
So the best way is to go to danforfreedom.com. You can get on my mailing list there. I also have links to all my social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. All of those channels are pretty much shadow banned. So they're ridiculously limited reach. And because of that, I've been putting less effort into those. But we are going to be doing a lot of the campaigning through these other organizations, which I think because of their content are going to be less likely to be shadow banned because, especially because they lean left. Zuckerberg will love them. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. But yeah, definitely go to danforfreedom.com and the mailing list is probably the best way because I want to say they can't block emails, but if you have Gmail, then Gmail will block them.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I mean, that's one of the best ways, is to get on the mailing list.
Okay. And is that also the website where people can pick up some nice Taxation is Theft swag?
So if you want Taxation is Theft swag, head over to TaxationIsTheft.info. And we're working on building more over there that's got, I've talked to a lot of great people who provide resources on how to not pay taxes. And so I'm trying to incorporate those into the website. There's actually a banner right there at the top. If you want to not pay taxes, press that button. We'll send you a free PDF. And then there's also some other great resources that I'm going to be connecting people with because, I mean, ultimately, let's stop paying taxes. Why not?
Hell yeah, man. I need to get me another one of those flags. Mine got beat up pretty good out here in this Oklahoma weather.
Oh, man.
But Dan, thanks a lot for coming on and talking to us, man. And I look forward to seeing what you got going on in the next few months or whatever. I'll have to bring you back on and see how these things are taking shape.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime, brother. You have a good evening.
You too.
All right. And there you have it. Once again, thanks a lot to Dan for coming on and talking to us. He has been around, and I don't think he remembers it or not, but like back when this podcast was just a blog, Dan was supportive way back when. You know, I wish I still had that website up. Maybe I can find a file somewhere, or at least get that back out to the masses, because it was really well written. But he's been a longtime supporter of the podcast and the project, and I'm excited to see what he's able to get accomplished in Texas. The man is fantastic at networking. He's a phenomenal public speaker. Yeah, can't go wrong with that. So once again, thanks a lot, Dan, and thank you guys for sticking in there and for listening. You know, it's great having the audience that we have. You know, if you're listening to this, this podcast is available on all, you know, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all that. And then also check out the YouTube channel. Anybody that you can get to listen to this show, man, I appreciate it wholeheartedly from my utmost being. And so, yeah, that's really all I got. Just wanted to get sappy there with you guys for a little bit. You like that? Like me getting all mushy? Anyways, you guys have a phenomenal week. I hope you go out there and just kick some ass and conquer everything you set out to conquer. And let this song that I'm about to play kind of guide you in. Let me see which one I'm playing real quick. I know it's going to be Fear. Absolutely going to be Fear. You guys, you know, you've had me or heard me play this band before way back when. This is old school New York punk. Like, this is the real deal, man. And I think, you know what? We're going to play Beef Bologna. And here's why I'm playing this song. It's going to sound kind of goofy at first, but give it a second. It's just, man, it's just hardcore, old school, you know, punk rock, like the real deal. Go to YouTube and check it out. Like, find this clip. Put Fear, SNL Performance 1981. This band got on stage and played this song, and they got banned from the set for life. Like, they were never allowed to come back. I guess Belushi was a big-time, like, punk fan. And, yeah, he brought these guys on, and they just trashed the set. Like, it was so awesome. But anyway, I'll leave you guys with that. That's just a little punk rock history for you. Little extra knowledge that you can carry into your work week. So there you go. And anyways, here is Fear, Beef Bologna.
Baby, so talk about low down skakadoo. And it's a sing and a homo sing. Homo said, my baby just about the low down skaggy do.